Good morning, everyone. My name is Jake Kyle, and I am an assistant professor at Rowan University in New Jersey. Thank you for your flexibility in allowing me to present this way. In any case, I'm going to be presenting on my work, which is really sort of a re-examination of prior work, including my book, Resettled Iraqi Refugees in the United States. So just to give context for this work, the research revolves around the Iraq War, which began in 1991. It's been going on for 35 years and in many ways continues into the present. The work really looks specifically at the 2003 invasion of Iraq by the United States and the United Kingdom primarily, and the fact that it caused hundreds of thousands of deaths and the displacement of millions of people, both within that country and beyond that country, many of whom became refugees. A relatively small number of those people then left Iraq, went to a second country, and then finally resettled in the United States. So about 172,000 Iraqis came to the US between 2003 and 2017 when I conducted the interviews for this project. So for this project, I interviewed 15 people in multiple locations throughout the United States, and I conducted the interviews in late 2017, early 2018. And this was, of course, a period of acute anti-refugee rhetoric, but also policies from the first Trump administration. Now, the full scope of the work, it looks at the war itself in Iraq, and then it shifts to the experiences of people who became refugees, who resettled here, and their interactions with other people in American society, both US born, but also other newcomers, other immigrants, etc. And it looks really deeply at their experiences with democratic participation in the United States, how they engaged in various processes, civil society, etc. So with that in mind, to start out, the war itself, as I said, the American invasion and occupation of Iraq caused hundreds of thousands of deaths and led to the displacement of millions of people. I heard as a recurring theme throughout the work that the war had destroyed the country. You can see a quote here from a man pseudonymously called Hashim, who said, "There's no good reason to destroy the country. The country is completely destroyed." And this kind of rhetoric I heard over and over again. This is important as we are now living through a continued sort of mutation of the Iraq War, the war on terror and so forth. The United States and Israel are currently attacking multiple countries, bombing Iran, bombing Lebanon, and have killed several thousand people. These numbers are actually out of date. The figures are unfortunately much higher, wounded many more, and displaced 1 million people in Lebanon and many thousands of people in Iran. And of course, Israel has been engaged in genocide for the last 2.5 years in Gaza, in the West Bank, and all throughout occupied Palestine. As we think about 2026 and how things have changed since 2003, we can also think about continuities and ways in which the kinds of rhetoric, the kinds of justifications for such actions remain similar. So here you have a quote from a woman, again pseudonymously called Nora, who said, "The US said they were liberating Iraq, but they're invading actually." And we see very similar rhetoric today when it comes to Israel, the United States, Iran, Lebanon, and so forth. So after 2003, many people decided to seek safety elsewhere. As I said, some in other parts of the country, and in other cases in other countries, other parts of the world. And so many people left the country, and a relatively small number of them came to the United States as refugees. And this work has looked very directly at the experiences of those individuals as refugees in the United States. And some of the things that I found that are relevant, I think, still into the present are the fact that many people I talked with described their experiences in very similar terms to the famous Du Bois idea of being a problem, the strange experience of being a problem in society, of being viewed by the dominant society as intrinsically wrong, bad, incompatible with American society. There are both long-standing Islamophobic narratives and discourses in American society, but also specifically in 2017, 2018, many of the people I interviewed had this newly peaked uncertainty. They didn't know what Trump would do. Would they be kicked out of the country? And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. And so one of the ways in which people I spoke with sort of tried to mediate this for themselves and in their communities is through the idea of exchange, of meeting neighbors, making friends, engaging with schools and community organizations, and trying to create spaces and expand spaces to share their own cultural practices and traditions, and also to learn from American society. And in some cases, to synthesize those two things together to create something new. And so a key insight, I think, that really remains relevant in 2026 from this research is the idea that it can be challenging and there are barriers to doing this, but one way to sort of engage with people in society is, instead of the fear and the reaction to difference, is an openness, a curiosity of thinking seriously, how do we learn from each other and how do we create something new in that encounter? Now, as I said, there are barriers to this. People can't simply choose to engage in society. There are limits to that, both social, legal, and so forth. And one of the other themes that I think is very relevant to today in 2026 that I heard from people is that legal rights are not sufficient. Some people I spoke with were already citizens, others, like Nada, were green card holders, so they have a legal right to be here, to live here, to work, etc. But even still, for people like Nada, as you can see, that didn't give them a sense that they are fully a part of the society, nor did it make them feel confident that their rights would be substantively protected in practice. That, like Nada, if she left the country, even though she had a right to return, the laws might simply be changed and she'd be barred from re-entering the country. And at the time, in 2018, when I was doing this work, my sense was some people thought Nada's fears were overblown, that of course her legal rights would be protected, but unfortunately, Nada was proved completely correct. She was right in the fear that even though she had a legal right, it isn't necessarily enough to protect her. Because at the end of the day, legal status is not necessarily a guarantee that your rights will be protected in practice. We can see this as well in the efforts by the second Trump administration to ramp up denaturalizations, to take away the citizenship of people, those who have worked very hard to become citizens, to go through all of the processes, to have full legal standing as equal members of the society. The Trump administration now is trying to take that away from people, and they have, in fact, denaturalized more people in the last year than we've seen in recent history. And this was something that also came up in the original research. I heard people say to me, for example, I'm a citizen, but I'm a naturalized citizen. Or I'm a citizen, but it will always be the case that I was born in Iraq, not the United States. And this creates a certain kind of precarity, a sense that I am not a full member of society, either socially or legally. And again, this has been borne out with recent events, unfortunately, this fear or this anxiety that there is always this precarity, this sense that, yes, of course, you have an equal legal standing, but at the end of the day, that isn't sufficient to protect you. And the reason for this is that rights are always revocable. They can be taken away. And if the government decides you are a problem in society, your citizenship will not necessarily protect you. We've seen this with recent events with Alex Preddy and Renee Good, and unfortunately, US citizens, US born citizens, but at the end of the day, they were killed and the government claimed they were terrorists. Now, one of the major things that has changed the context since I did this research is that during the first Trump administration, there were efforts to reduce drastically the number of refugees who were allowed into the country. And in the second term, that's been shut down completely. So no refugees are currently being allowed in, except for a small number of white South Africans who are recipients of this because of this fictional white genocide myth or conspiracy theory. An important part of this work is thinking about, in light of all of that I've just described, how do people resist? How do people push back against those negative discourses, those discriminatory policies? And I saw a whole host of things from the people I interviewed in terms of engagements in their communities, interfaith dialogues, and holding classes and know your rights events at nonprofits and so forth. And one of the most important things, given the context, was the activism organized against the original travel bans in 2017. And to my mind, this is the most important finding of that research, and it has very important echoes for today. And that's that after the travel bans were put into place, there was mass demonstrations against them. And those demonstrations, particularly the fact that they were organized by and led by US-born Americans, was really impactful for many of the people that I interviewed. You can see here a quote from a man named Ali, who basically said, seeing the fact that Americans go out, seeing American politicians go out and demonstrate against the federal government, gave him courage to go and be active in his community. And others told me that seeing Americans support people from the Middle East, people like them, gave them a sense that the society did want them to be here. And even if the activism wasn't ultimately successful in rolling back the travel bans, it did have this real effect in people's lives of making them feel welcome in the society, making them feel protected. And that is really important. And so what that says to me is that those of us with privilege in society have a responsibility to use that privilege to demonstrate publicly for the rights, for the safety of those who are targeted for discriminatory policies like these. So finally, just to conclude, and these are the conclusions from the book, and I think they still hold true, is we need to urgently find alternatives to U.S. military violence that is unfortunately ongoing. We need to work to create and enlarge those spaces for exchange, for diversity, for difference, for that curiosity rather than that fear. And we need to work and struggle for justice across multiple sites and modes of action with diverse strategies and tactics. Thank you very much, and thank you again for your flexibility this morning.